Okay, fine. So now let's go back and see how this affects relationships. Because in relationships, you know, if you ask marriage counselors across the United States when they're dealing with a couple whose marriage is in crisis, let's say a couple's marriage is in stress, and they go for help. So if you did a poll, a survey of all these thousands of marriage counselors across America, who would they tell you typically? Now, let's push aside the fact that there's always exceptions, but typically, are they going to say, is it the husband who lacks the skill set to make a marriage great more often, or the wife who naturally lacks the skill set to make a marriage great? Who typically is weaker? Husbands, right. As a matter of fact, I think you'll find that's true. Now, there are always exceptions, but from a Torah perspective, that makes sense. Why? Because if masculine means to give over an effect outside yourself from a place of no limitation, right? That spirituality is going in every direction. So in a man's world, everything is equally outside of him. Our brains do not process the world like yours do. Everything's equally outside of him, which means when a man gets married, he marries his wife, but he marries his career, he marries his car, he marries the TV, he marries the internet, he marries his golf game, he marries the health club. They're all equally outside of him, and they're all equally needy. My car needs a tune-up, my golf game needs me to practice, my boss needs a report on his desk, and my wife needs a conversation. But they're all equally outside of me, and my best hours are during the day when I'm not at home. You come home, you're tired, you're hungry, whatever, and now she wants a conversation. Do you hear? But in a man's world, everything stays equally outside of him. So it's very hard to define more essential and then less essential relationships. Women naturally tend to be better in relationships because rules and limitations take an idea to a higher level. So in a woman's world, I married him. And I didn't marry my career, and I didn't marry my golf game, I didn't marry the health club, I didn't marry the internet, I didn't marry my television set, so I expect more of my relationship with him than I expect from any of those other things. And that is a natural strength of relationships. That gives women a bit of an advantage. And the place I saw it over and over again, my wife and I were helping to run a beginner's synagogue in a northern suburb of Toronto in the early 90s. And you'd see, you know, over and over again, guys and girls would meet, they'd date, they'd fall in love, eventually they'd move in together and live totally happy as a couple for 2, 3, 4 years. And finally, the girl would be getting older, let's say pushing 30 or something. She'd turn to the guy and say, listen, we've been practically married for the last 4 years now. Why don't we make our parents happy? Why don't we have a ceremony? Why don't we make this relationship official? And then maybe we can start a family. And oftentimes the guys say, you know, the relationship we have right now is so good. Do we really want to make it more complicated? I mean, everybody we know is getting married. They're all getting divorced. Maybe we should just leave the relationship the way it is. And then the girls typically say, you know, well, once you've been living with somebody for years, you're practically married anyway. It's not like there are a lot of surprises. Like, it's just a ceremony. So if he says, fine, you're right, they get married, you know, oftentimes you'll see within a few years they're divorced. And all their friends are scratching their heads going, I don't get it. What a great couple. What went wrong when they got married? Like, and the answer is that she made a big mistake. The mistake women often make is that women think that men think like they do, and we, bless you, and we do not. We do not think like you do. And that's a critical thing you have to understand, because you have to put yourself in this guy's head years earlier when they met. What did this guy want? The answer is he wanted a social life. He wanted somebody to date. He wanted somebody to go to dinner with. He wanted somebody to go to the movies with. He wanted somebody to go to parties with. Eventually, he wanted somebody to share his bedroom and have a meaningful relationship together. He found a wonderful woman. But what happened within 60 seconds of him marrying her? So within 60 seconds of him marrying her, this girl went from everything this guy could possibly want to now she's the source of everyone else he can't have. And that wasn't true when they were dating. Think about it for a second. When they were living together, so she thought, this is it, this is forever, this is my husband. And whatever he thought, as long as they're not married, if she ever says the wrong thing or does the wrong thing or he gets bored or whatever it is, He packs his suitcase and walks out the door because there's 1.5 million other women for him to go out with. They're all equally outside of him. So once she marries him, because of her, there are 1.5 million women he can't go out with. And for a man, you just forced rules and limitations down his throat. And that's not a natural masculine strength. Rules and limitations is a feminine strength. That's why oftentimes out there in the world of dating, you'll see men typically will be more commitment phobic. Because we don't come from a place of rules and limitations. We come up from a place where that flow, that spirituality is heading off in every direction. And therefore, it's very difficult for men to, you know, I saw it a lot on college campuses. Guys and girls would date for years, and then, you know, you'd see Dave walking across the campus. You say, hey, Dave, where's Susan? And he goes, oh, we broke up. You go, my gosh, you broke up after so many years. Must have been terrible. He goes, oh, yeah, I was very depressed. Went to the barn and met Debbie, like you'd meet Debbie. Start to finish recovery time, 48 hours. Meanwhile, Susan, who he dated for 2 years, hasn't left her dorm room in 6 weeks. She's so depressed. Because in a certain way, rules and limitations taking you to a higher level means that a relationship is something you're building on the feminine side. Whereas for a guy to go from girlfriend to girlfriend to girlfriend to girlfriend is easier because they're all outside of him. So marriage is about creating a commitment. You know, if women got together, if you all made a rule and said, listen, you know, we women will make a rule now that when we meet guys, we all tell them in advance, listen, you seem like a nice guy, I'm looking to get married, I'm happy to date you, maybe you're the right guy, maybe you're not, let's find out. However, you have to understand that from the minute we meet until the time you put a ring on my finger in front of 300 people, if you're the right guy, you touch nothing. See this pinky? You're not going to touch it, right? No hug, hello, nothing. You guys all have to get together and make that rule. Because what you want to do is force guys to limit themselves down to you while they figure out if you're the right person or not. But once it gets too complicated in terms of relationships or touch or intimacy or whatever it is, nobody thinks clearly anymore. So you want the guy to say, good rule, I'm with you 100%, no touching. If you're the right girl, fine. I'll put a ring in your finger in front of 300 people, and then the rules change. But until that point, I'm good with those rules. Let's get to know each other. By that methodology, you have a fighting chance to figure out whether this is the right guy. If you don't make the rule, you cannot figure it out. And any guy who looks at you says, 1 second, you're a fanatic. I'm going to go find somebody who doesn't have that rule. So good. So you're better off not dating him. So you hear the problem, right? Nobody's making the rule, except for obviously Orthodox Jewish women, but you're not making the rule, and therefore you're on the risk of really getting hurt. Because once there's once the relation becomes complicated, it's not about communication and getting to know each other, but there's a physical component in the relationship, nobody can think clearly. Because, ladies, here's the problem. Any touch on any level is sending a message to the human brain, this is beautiful, this is meaningful, this is good, this is working. Whereas communication, which doesn't involve touch, is a chance to still get to know who the person is and allows you to make a decision to walk away. But if your brain's getting the message, this is good, this is beautiful, this is working, why in the world would you walk away? And it could be you should, because it's not the right guy. That's why you gotta make the rule of, let's just communicate, get to know each other, and if it's right, great, we'll keep going. And if it's not right, let's spare each other a lot of emotional trauma and walk away. Did you hear? I mean, that was friendly advice, okay? Now, I'm often asked, what do you do if the average guy out there doesn't have natural limitation? What do you do if the average guy out there is commitment phobic, or it's hard for him to limit himself down to one relationship and take it to a higher level? So how do you get around the problem? So listen, at Neve Yerushalayim, we're here to help you learn Torah, develop your relationship with Hashem, learn about mitzvahs, whatever. You have to do everything at your own pace. But I'll give you some advice, and that is that when you're not looking at a social life because you're bored or you're lonely, but you're looking at a social life because you're trying to find a husband, whenever that stage occurs to you to try to find a husband and create your own home, you'll do yourself a favor, no matter how religious you are, if you limit yourself to only dating guys who've learned Torah. Let's say you're not even that religious, or you don't keep that many mitzvahs. And you're thinking, well, I don't want to, don't give me a yeshiva guy because he's a fanatic. The answer is, guess what? You're still better off dating guys who've learned Torah, even if they're not a religious fanatic. Why? Because the process is good for a man. In other words, learning Torah sends the right message to a developing guy. I'll give you an example, okay? I'll give you an example. Let's take a kid who is going to learn Torah. Let's take a kid from an Orthodox Jewish family. You should date kids from Orthodox Jewish families. It's very good for you. So let's take that. I'm using this example on purpose rather than a kid growing up who learned a little Torah. Let's take one who gets all of 12 years of schooling by learning Torah. So he's 7 years old. We sit him down in a chair on the first day of school in the first grade. And the Rabbi, the teacher, walks in the room and says, hey kids, guess what? You can't eat whatever you want because there's something called kosher. Hashem cares about what you eat. And you can't go wherever you want. There's something called Shabbat. You're not allowed to drive on Shabbat. And you can't say whatever you want because there's something called Lashon Hara. It's malicious gossip. You might hurt people's feelings. Hashem doesn't want you to hurt people's feelings. And you can't, 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 and you can't. And guess what, kids? There are 613 rules. We're saying this to this little boy, 7 years old, right? There's 613 rules. Day one of first grade. And then the Rebbe says to him, and you know why there's 613 rules, young man? They're not for God. Mitzvahs are not for God. Whether you keep mitzvahs or not, God's infinitely perfect. He will never change. You keep Torah, he's still infinitely perfect. You don't keep Torah, he's still infinitely perfect. You don't keep mitzvahs for God. God wasn't bored. He didn't give them to you for entertainment value. You know why it's good to keep 613 mitzvahs? Because if you keep these rules, you're going to be a tzaddik one day. You want to be righteous, you want to lead the Jewish people, rules will make you great. Rules and limitations are not your enemy. God made them so that he can make you great. That's where leadership comes from. That's where greatness comes from. That's day one. Now, we're going to send that message to this young man for the next 16 years. That rules and limitations will make you great. They're not your enemy, right? That is a healthy feminine message that's going into his masculine brain. Now he's 22 years old. He's 23 years old. This kid's not going to go from girlfriend to girlfriend to girlfriend like a typical male because he knows rules and limitations. Limiting himself down to one girl for the rest of his life will make him great. Going from girlfriend to girlfriend to girlfriend will destroy him. He gets it because we've been pounding that into his head for the last 16 years of his Torah education. Do you hear why Hashem is putting an extra mitzvah of learning Torah on the male side? You get a mitzvah when you learn Torah, but this guy is obligated for the rest of his life because it's an incredibly healthy message in a place where his side lacks that message. You have it naturally. And that's why Torah is a feminine word. What's Torah? Rules and limitations that take you to a higher level. So obviously he needs more of it. Now, let's take that 7-year-old and let's put him in public school for the next 16 years. Day one, first grade. The teacher walks in the room and says, hey kid, guess what? You can be anything, you can go anywhere, you can do anything. The world's at your doorstep. You want to be an astronaut? Go for it. You want to be an NBA basketball player? Doesn't matter if you're 5'6", go for it. You want to be president of the United States? Go for it. The world's at your doorsteps. Rules and limitations will suffocate you. Just don't hurt anybody else. and do whatever it is you want. That's a public school message. He's going to get that pounded into his head for the next 16 years. Now he's 23. Do you think he's really going to marry this girl? What if the next girl's smarter? What if the next girl's prettier? What if the next girl's wealthier? What if the next girl's funnier? I mean, he's got 10,000 reasons not to limit himself down to this person for the rest of his life. He's not going to tell her that. But he's at high risk of going from girlfriend to girlfriend to girlfriend, or at high risk of being unhappy in a marriage. Because the message we've been bombarding him with doesn't have the same healthy rules and limitations to take him to a higher level. You follow? It's a big problem. Okay? So that's the difference, in essence, between masculine and feminine when it comes to risks at social life. The guy's walking around with a worldview that's more risky because everything falls equally outside of him. And it's very hard for him to define a relationship as more essential and take that one to a higher level at the expense of all the other messages that he's being inundated with. Okay, any questions on that? We'll stop over here.